Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today we're going to take a look at the Egyptian sniper model of the FN49 rifle. This is, of course, the first semi-auto rifle to be developed by FN after World War II. This would fairly quickly lead to the development of the FAL, but there was this brief time period in the late 40s and early 1950s when the FN49 was kind of the hot thing in semi-automatic military rifles. And it appealed to a bunch of countries that had come out of World War II still having bolt-action rifles. So we would see the FN49 adopted by Belgium, Luxembourg, Egypt, here of course, Venezuela, Colombia, Argentina, and a lot of these countries would actually go on to adopt the FAL just a few years later. But to get back to Egypt here, Egypt was actually the first country to adopt the FAL, the FN49. They were placing orders in 1948 and 1949. They had rifles delivered by 1950. These are chambered for 8mm Mauser, which is presumably why Egypt ended up going with that. These were purchased in that brief span after World War II, but before Egypt decided to basically fall under Eastern Bloc influence for its small arms. They would go on to use AKs extensively. But before that, they wanted something in 8mm Mauser. They had a bunch of Mauser bolt-action rifles already. They could get M1 Garands from the US as surplus, probably quite cheap, but not in 8mm. And so here was this alternative from FN. FN was hungry for business to try and get its production back up and running after German occupation during the war. And so Egypt was able to get these rifles delivered really quite quickly. By the end of the contracts, they would have bought a total of about 37,600 of these. And like I said, the first batch being delivered in 1950. In fact, as the first country to adopt these guns, Egyptian adoption actually predated FN having a sniper or designated marksman's option for these rifles. So Egypt made their own to start with Czech military assistance, or well, rather with Czech-made scopes and mounts from Meopta. So let's take a look at exactly what we're looking at here, because there was an early version and then there was actually a late version. What we have here are two examples of the later version. First off, let's take a look at what denotes a proper, legitimate Egyptian sniper. And there are a couple things to look for. First off, these guns were manufactured out of the the very last 2,000 guns ordered by Egypt. So their serial numbers are generally going to be between 33 and 35,000. Of course, this is made slightly more complicated by the fact that the serial numbers are all written in Egyptian script, not in our traditional and perhaps in this case ironically named Arabic numerals. So this particular one is serial numbered 34588, falls nicely at the end of that range, and you'll find that number on all sorts of parts. So up here on the stock, this is quite relevant because a lot of Egyptian FNs are not in their original stocks. You'll find that number up here on the front of the receiver as well. And it's also here on the scope, although I have it upside down at the moment. So the scopes, by the way, are all matching to the rifles. Now, not every rifle in that 2,000 rifle serial range was actually assembled as a sniper. Instead, they were purchased from FN with a couple, well, really one distinctive feature. They have a third sling swivel added here, which is important for setting up the sling as a shooting sling. You'll note that this is the proper original sling, which is also a quite rare thing to find. And you'll note that it's set up like a US 1907 shooting sling with the hooks and all of that, which can be rearranged using the third swivel for a proper shooting sling. When the Egyptians decided to make snipers out of these guns, they then added a few elements. They added on a slotted flash hider or compensator at the muzzle. Standard Egyptian rifles don't have that, including these late production ones. And they also added a cheek riser to bring the shooter's line of sight up, commensurate with the additional height of the scope. In order to clear the iron sights, these scopes are actually fairly high on the rifles. However, where the Belgians had a symmetrical cheek piece for their standard FN sniper rifles, the Egyptians went ahead and went with a non-symmetrical one. So this hangs over the left side of the stock. It's for specifically right-hand shooting, and you can see it's attached with 3 flathead screws there. The Belgian ones just had 2. Some of the features you'll find on all of the Egyptian FNs include the brass stock disc, and also the brass butt plate with a trap in it for a cleaning kit. Now, these late production Egyptian rifles also had the dovetail in the receiver that's necessary for mounting this standard FN49 scope mount. However, these aren't quite applied the same or installed the same way as the factory ones. You'll notice there's a pair of screws here. That's what's holding this mount in place. The mount itself is the standard Echo mount. For more details on the backstory behind that, check out the video I already published a little while back on the Belgian, or specifically the Luxembourg, FN49 snipers. This is distinct to the later Egyptian snipers. So the first ones that Egypt did, they did on early production guns that didn't have this sort of dovetail, and they did it by getting mounts and scopes from Meopta. Unfortunately, Egypt appears to have scrapped or retained in its own possession all of those guns, and the best reference I have is a single one-sided picture from the collector grade book on the FN49, and unfortunately it only shows this side of the gun. So we can see the Meopta scope. We can see that it's actually offset to the left of the gun, which makes sense given the left side cheek rest that Egypt was using, or continued to use afterwards. But I can't tell you anything about the mount that was originally on there, except that it didn't have rings. These Meopta scopes actually had dovetail brackets machined into or as a part of the scope bodies. So what Egypt did is, once it had acquired these sort of standard FN sniper pattern rifles, they went back and they retrofitted, they used Echo mounts, which are really excellent mounts, and then they retrofitted their existing Meopta scopes to work with the Echo mounts. If we take a look at the mount here, you can see it's marked OIP. This is actually the company that was providing the scopes for the standard sniper rifles. 1955 and Belgium. These scope mounts were made commercially in Belgium. They have a number here on the mount, and I have seen 4 of these, 3 of them in person and 1 in the collector grade book. That number doesn't match the scope or the rifle on any of those 4. So I'm not sure exactly what that number is supposed to indicate, but then there is also what I believe is an Egyptian property mark here stamped into the mount. We have sort of the standard Echo Herkner manufacturing identification marks on the mount itself. And then if I take this off, we can see a couple other interesting details on it. Namely, what used to be this dovetail mounting bracket has been milled off. Scope rings have been added so that this scope can fit an Echo mount. This scope was originally only about this long, and you can see that in that one original picture, but if they hadn't put the rings here, the scope would have been too far forward to get a proper eye relief. So instead, they actually added this big long extension on the front of the scope, and we know that this was done by the Egyptians because these are all serial numbered to their specific guns. And if this was just done by an importer into the US, they wouldn't have been serialized like that, certainly not in Egyptian script. So the scopes were modified to fit the Echo mounts and then refitted on later production guns. The exact number that were done like this is unclear. So Egypt bought approximately 2,000 rifles set up to make mounts, to make into snipers like this. I have heard numbers of probably 100 actually being converted into snipers, but our serial number range that we have available is a bit wider than that. We have ranging from 34,074 up to 34,588. And if we look at the scopes are also numbered. This one is number 358, and I have recorded scopes ranging from the 100 range up to the high 900s. So did they perhaps make as many as 1,500 into snipers? Possibly. It is possible that some of these guns were then later de-sniperized, but probably not. You can find Egyptian rifles from this serial number range that don't have the sniper features like the cheek rest or the screw holes that would have been required for the cheek rest, that don't have the flash hider. It really is unclear how many of these guns were made into sniper rifles. looking at the scope in detail for a moment, you can see that this was clearly an Egyptian contract scope because, again, of the range markings there. This goes from 0 through 100 meter increments, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then this guy, the 1 and the dot, is the Egyptian writing of 1, 0, so that's 1,000 meters. So the scopes had the same BDC range as the iron sights, from 0 out to 1,000 meters in 100 meter increments. And then we have a cap here over your windage adjustment. And I should mention that this is a 2.5 power optic with a pretty simple German post style of reticle. So the exact number of these guns that were imported into the US is a little bit hazy. I have seen numbers ranging from as few as perhaps 30 up to maybe as many as 100. As you can see from the serial number range on these, they don't quite fit into one standard serial number range that would cover all of those guns. And so we don't know exactly which. It seems that the guns were pretty much picked at random from the available, the 2,000 guns available in the pre-sniper configuration to actually be built into snipers. So that said, there are the features on these things, the Meopta scopes, the way the mounts are built, really make these fairly difficult guns to fake, and I'm not aware of any being faked out there. What is more common is guns being assembled with completely non-military scopes and mounts that people think are official snipers because they haven't seen real ones. So hopefully being able to get a look at a couple of them here today will help enlighten you and give you an idea of what to actually look for if you would like a proper Egyptian military sniper FN49. Thanks for watching.